Welcome to your daily dose of salt and light with myself, Nadine Ness. We have a guest today. I know last week I said I wasn't going to have guests this week, but I have three. I'm really excited about this one. His name is Franco Terrazzano. I hope I'm saying his name properly. He is the federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Basically, they're an organization that looks at all government spending and they hold them accountable. They bring to light a lot of the things that are happening, and also they expose a lot of the insane government spending that is happening. And some of that has been getting exposed this week. We had the scandal happening in the US with the USAID that kind of got Canadians to start looking into, do we have something similar in Canada? And it looks like we do through Global Affairs Canada. And I did report on this last week a little bit on Franco's reporting, but just to give you a little bit of background on Franco, he's not just the Canadian Taxpayers Federation federal director. He also has a Bachelor of Arts in Economics, and he also has a Master in Public Policy. And he's been doing this for a long time. Before he was the federal director, he was the director of the chapter or the area in Alberta. And with that, I'm going to bring here. I just got to figure out how do I do it. There you go. I brought you up. I think I have you muted, so I'm just going to unmute quickly.
Hey, now you can hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, right on.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Perfectly. It was perfect.
Did I say it right? Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure. And so you reported last week on several things that while the USAID scandal was happening in the US, we're starting to see, okay, we have also very ridiculous spending. Do you want to go into, or have you been reporting about all this all along and I just didn't see it because it wasn't trending?
Well, we've been calling out government waste for like decades here, right? Like we've been doing this for decades, which is nice now is that Canadians are so sick and tired of the government wasting our money, hiking our taxes, that it's really getting a lot of traction here, right? And you mentioned the USAID, which is like a big scandal down there, but we have let's call it a sister department in Canada, Global Affairs Canada. I don't know if that's the best way to describe it, but Global Affairs Canada might be the worst waste offender in the entire government, and that's saying a lot. Like that's saying a lot. Now, let me just read you some of the stuff they've been blowing our money on. And folks, if you got the kids around, earmuffs, I apologize. This isn't me. This is the government spending your money. But they spent almost $9,000 on a sex toy show in Germany. The title of the show was "Whose Jizz Is This?" $9,000 sex toy show in Germany. And you know, Nadine, maybe I'm a little too old fashioned. I don't know. But if the Germans want to have a sex toy show, they should pay for it themselves, not with our hard-earned tax dollars. And let me just describe what was going on at this sex toy show. This is from the government, okay? Quote, "The centerpiece of the show was a large water fountain consisting of a number of double-ended sex toys spouting water from both their mouths and vaginas." Your tax dollars, folks.
This is insane. And I did see the advertisement for it, and it's quite disturbing. But you also mentioned a whole bunch. I brought it up on the screen here. I'm just going to bring some of it up. And do you think it's all like interlinked to a lot of the DEI stuff that we're seeing in the US? Do you think that's the same thing that's happening in Canada and it's being pushed through? And I say DEI, you know what I mean? It includes all of the woke agenda. But do you think it's one of the bigger focus, or is this one where we really see like government money wasted?
Oh, no, like I've got a huge list of some of the spending, and there is some DEI stuff right in the documents, right? $7,500 to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion at a music festival in Estonia. So there are stuff like that. I mean, here's another one, okay? Let's see, $8,100 to organize DJ workshops, like DJ workshops in Turkey and Georgia, for the LGBTQ community to, quote, bring more diversity into the world of DJing. Let me read you another one. Yeah, let me read you another one. $1,700 for a musical called Lesbian Pirates, which tells the tale of two lesbians who met while cross-dressing as male pirates, fell in love, slaughtered swaths of men, stole treasure, and escaped persecution of the law. So at
Wow.
this point, I certainly think that's a part of it. And remember, folks, like, this is your money. This is your
Mhm.
money that you and your family worked hard, and then the government takes it and wastes it abroad. Nadine, can I give you one more example? I think
Sure, sure. I
it's
think
like,
it's important we show people exactly how insane it is.
and like, folks, I just want you to know this is the tip of the iceberg. I've got more than 1,000 pages of access to information requests from Global Affairs Canada detailing crazy spending like this. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. This one just stood out to me. Okay, $12,500 for live stage performances of, quote, all the sex I ever had. Now, this was
That was the
senior
senior
citizens.
one.
Yeah, this is senior citizens in other countries talking about their sex lives in front of live audiences, okay? They were talking about their first time, best time, worst time, last time. Now, Nadine, I remember when my mom used to say, listen to your elders, respect your elders. I don't think this is what she had in mind. You know what I
No.
mean? And like, look, folks, these aren't even Canadian seniors. These were senior citizens in countries like Australia, Taiwan, Austria. So it turns out we're outsourcing old people sex stories.
So these are things that are outside of Canada because it's Global Affairs Canada. There's so many insane ones. Even I'm just looking at the tweet that you did listing a few. Have you guys dug into similar things in Canada? Because I've seen like numbers of the massive amounts of spending into DEI and like woke agenda in Canada, and it's in the millions. These are several thousand. It all adds up, but in the millions. Have you guys been uncovering that yet, or just kind of focusing right now on Global's Affair Canada?
Oh no, we've dug up like crazy amounts of waste happening in Canada. Let me give you just one example. We can go into them a little bit more.
Sure.
But so the National Capital Commission, which is like this like federal parks and recs board on steroids, they spent $8 million building a barn at Rideau Hall, the Governor General's mansion estate. Okay, so like this is happening in Canada as well. Let me just give you two more examples. I want to give you another
Sure.
quote unquote smaller example from Global Affairs Canada. Then I want to give you some big examples because it's not
Sure.
just in the thousands. Okay. So think about this one. This really hurts me. How many Canadians are out there right now struggling in pain, waiting forever to get a hip replacement? Right? Like that's going
Years.
on.
Yeah.
That's going on. And if you need a hip replacement, it's hard to enjoy any aspect of life. Okay.
Mhm.
I know this firsthand from someone who's very close to me. Okay. So while Canadians are struggling with our healthcare system that's in shambles, the government of Canada spent $7.2 million for a, quote, gender responsive systems approach to universal healthcare in the Philippines. Like, doesn't that drive you nuts? I
Wow.
mean, it makes me like absolutely choke up. Okay, let me get into some of the bigger examples. Okay, Global Affairs Canada spent $10 million on a chancery, essentially an office building in Ukraine. $12.5 million on, quote, vacant land in Senegal, West Africa.
Wow.
$41 million for 3 properties in Afghanistan, which were then quickly abandoned to the Taliban.
41 million?
41 million. Okay. So the Taliban has these new digs and Canadians back home are out 41 million bucks. Now, if you look at all of the funding that's going out the door in what's called foreign aid, not just from Global Affairs Canada, but other departments too, the last year the government has numbers on or published them on is from 2022-23. Okay. The government of Canada spent $15.5 billion on foreign aid in 2022. Now, let me just put that into perspective. What's 15.5 billion, right? 15.5 billion is about the same amount of money as what the government sends to the provinces in Canada social transfers. So for like college, university, other social assistance programs, it's almost the same. Okay. If foreign aid was its own department, it would be about the 5th largest department of the federal government. Let me give you one more quote. Okay, the government is spending on foreign aid in 2022 almost 3 times more than what the entire Department of Veterans Affairs spent money on.
Wow. As a recipient of Veterans Affairs benefits, as a former police officer and actually Army vet, I just find that so shocking. Now, I don't want to get conspiratorial here, but if we look at facts, this current government, this current Liberal government has been extremely corrupt. We're hearing stories after stories, scandals after scandals. They keep getting away with it. Do you think the same way we're seeing in the US, perhaps some of this money is being funneled back to some of the elected officials that are, I don't even want to say voting for this, but where does the approval for this even come from?
Okay, so I actually think one of the biggest problems that we're facing is that our, elected officials, to call them a nice term, our politicians actually have no idea this is going on. And I actually think that's the bigger problem, right? That I guarantee you that if I gave this list to most members of parliament, they probably would have never heard of this spending before, right? You have the unelected bureaucrats who are essentially running the show here, right? We have so many bureaucrats, like 400,000 plus in the federal government, and the federal bureaucracy has expanded so much that it really feels to me like our members of parliament aren't really the ones who are running the show here. It's the unelected bureaucrats. Okay. So I don't want to get into anything that I can't prove or anything that isn't substantiated by the facts. But what I will say is that's a problem. And I'll also say that what we need from any government that wants to be like a true champion of taxpayers, protect people and their hard-earned money, what we have to see is a full opening of the books in every department, line by line by line. Because I bet you here that the government could find billions and billions of dollars in savings that the vast majority of average Canadians would never notice if it was gone.
So basically what you're advocating for is the Doge version of Canada, the Department of Government Efficiency they're using in the US. You want to see similar thing happen here in Canada.
Well, I don't know. I mean, call it whatever you want. I don't even know if you need a new department. This all should be happening within the finance department, quite frankly, right? But we need to see a full opening of the books, every single department, and we need to see line by line savings, because what's going on in Canada is absolutely insane. So think about this, folks, okay? In less than a decade, the Trudeau government doubled the entire national debt. Okay, in less than a decade. So what? It took about 150 plus years for the government to run up $600 billion of debt. In less than a decade, the government doubled it. And what does that mean? Well, number one, it means that, look, I think everyone wants to leave a better financial future to their kids and their grandkids. Well, a baby born today is on the hook for about $30,000 in federal government debt alone. And it's not just future generations who are being burdened by this. Okay, debt interest charges are costing Canadians more than $1 billion every week. Well, what's $1 billion every week? That's the cost of a new hospital that we're not getting because it's being wasted on interest charges. Let me put this into one more little context here. Every dollar you pay in federal sales tax now goes to pay interest on the debt. Every single dollar.
Wow. I was just trying to find the graph while you were talking, because I've seen it before. It just shows the comparison between previous government and current government. But I don't think people realize the debt, because we don't see it, right? It's not like we get a credit card statement at the end of the month that we see the debt that Canada has as a country. So how do we simplify this for Canadians so they recognize how big of a problem this is?
Well, I mean, I think even just putting it in per person terms, right? $30,000 a person is what you owe in federal debt. Here's another one. Now, this isn't just the federal government, but this is all levels of government. more than 40% of the average family's budget, almost half, more than 40% goes to taxes. Okay. So think about it this way. Take your paycheck, cut it in half.
Mhm.
That's going to the tax man. Right?
I paint this picture for people so that they understand that I have a t-shirt that it's like a pajama t-shirt, but my father-in-law gave me, and it says on there, taxes are what you pay for a something reasonable society. But at the time this guy did this quote, Tax Freedom Day was like January like 23rd or something. So 3 weeks out of the year. So what that meant is a person would work up to 3 weeks full time. All that money would go to the government. Everything else they made the rest of the year would be theirs. So it was the day they were free from paying taxes. Tax Freedom Day, I think right now is like June 22nd.
It's nuts.
It's insane.
It's nuts.
So every single hour you work between January 1st and June 22nd, your money goes to, all of it goes to the government. You get to keep what's after. Like when you give people that picture, they realize like they're really being slaves to the government. Like, I don't know how else you would describe it. That's a better picture for people.
So there's three different ways that taxes really harm you. Okay. There's three ways. Number one is the most obvious, right? It takes money directly off out of your wallet, right? The government directly just takes money out of your wallet. Think income taxes, payroll taxes, capital gains taxes, things of that nature, right? Number one. Number two, they make your life more expensive, right? We've talked about the carbon tax for so long. I mean, the carbon tax is a direct hit on the necessities of life in Canada, right?
Yes.
Canada's a big place. You got to drive. The carbon tax makes that more expensive. Canada's a cold place. Got to stay warm. Carbon tax makes that more expensive as well. And of course, we all have to eat. Well, guess what? The carbon tax makes that more expensive as well, right? Every trip to the grocery store is more expensive because of the carbon tax. So that's the second way that taxes impact your life. First is it takes more money out of your pocket. The second is that it makes life more expensive. Now, if you look at those two ways, think about this, folks. The average Canadian family now pays more in taxes than it does on food, shelter, and clothing combined. That's nuts, right? But here's the third way that taxes impact you. Taxes are also used not merely to take more money from you, but also to control your life. It is a way that the elite class in government, in the bureaucracy, sometimes in the media, but also through academia, control you. And I'll bring back the carbon tax because it's a very good illustration of this, right? You have these taxpayer-funded academics who draw these fake models on their chalkboard, and then they say, wait a second, the real world doesn't act the way my fake model says it should. So now I'm going to advocate to government. Remember, these are all taxpayer-funded academics. I'm going to advocate for government to hit you with a tax so you change the way you actually live, right? That is where the carbon tax comes from. That is what the carbon tax. The carbon tax is essentially do what we say or pay. So those are the three different ways taxation hits you. Takes money out of your pocket, makes life more expensive, and it also is used as a way to have control over your life, how to dictate how you should live.
And I'm a very much libertarian type of politics. I don't want the government controlling me. I don't want them to telling me how to live, but we're seeing that more and more. Another type of tax you could talk about is when they were talking about if you sell your home, any profits you make off or the value had gone up, they would tax you on that. It's not being put yet in place, but just all sorts of things. Now, there's one tax that's not called a tax, but that almost acts the same way, and that's inflation.
Oh, that is a tax, 100%.
It is, but you can't call it a tax. Can you explain to the listeners how inflation is basically an invisible tax and probably one of the worst of all?
Well, I would say it probably is the worst of all.
Yeah.
So let's define what we're talking about, right? Inflation, and it's kind of funny, but back decades ago, I should say, inflation from a lot of really good economists didn't mean consumer price inflation.
Mhm.
Right now, we think of inflation, we think of, oh, how much a price has gone up. But if you go back a couple decades ago, and some really good economists would define inflation not as a change in consumer prices, but the change in the money supply, because that is
Mhm.
what really increases prices across the board, right? Taxes influence prices, regulations influence prices, supply shortages influence prices. But what drives up prices across the board is an increase in the money supply, okay? And where it actually becomes a government inflation tax is when the central bank prints up new dollars out of thin air, buying government bonds, okay? And this is what happened during the pandemic that was out of ordinary. The central bank, the Bank of Canada, printed up more than $300 billion out of thin air with a click of the keypad, largely by buying Government of Canada debt. Okay? That's how the central bank creates new money every time it purchases a financial asset. So that is the inflation tax, where you have the central bank, in effect, financing massive deficits in Ottawa. Now, why does that create inflation when you just have the Government of Canada's central bank printing up dollars out of thin air? Well, think about it this way, folks. The Bank of Canada is printing new dollars out of thin air, but you can't just print up what the money buys, right? You can't print farmland out of thin air. You can't print gasoline out of thin air. You can't even print bananas out of thin air. So as the government is printing money, it creates the perfect storm of inflation where you have too many dollars chasing too few goods. Now, here's another reason why it's so bad. Number one, inflation is a fundamental undemocratic tax, right? I mean, at least in theory, politicians are supposed to vote before they increase income tax rates.
Yeah.
Well, nobody's voting on this central bank printing up new money, right? It's like a hidden type of tax. But the third way, too, is that the way it works is that inflation is also redistributive, okay? It comes because the new money enters the system, not from falling through the air, but through the financial system. And everyone who is closer to the new money, well, you get the new money before prices rise. Everyone who's further away from the new money, well, you have to pay the higher prices before you get the new dollars.
And the thing is, there's a certain sector of the population that gets affected the most. This is actually a tax for the poor, not for the rich, because the rich have a lot of assets and the values of those assets go up with inflation for the most part. But a lot of poor people don't have assets. So everything costs more, but their assets are inexistent. So it affects them even more. It's one of the things that upsets me more about it, because it's these elitists who are making these decisions, but it's the regular everyday people, everyday Canadian, that are affected the most. And they don't even know that it's happening. They blame it on so many other things, but it's a direct result of insane government spending.
And that's why governments, I mean, really, for so long, I don't want to say throughout history, but kind of throughout history, right? Why these massive, big spending governments in many different countries have always loved the quote unquote printing press, right? Because it's such a non-transparent way to essentially take money from people. And of course, you're so right when you say it's the poor and working class who are the most affected by the inflation tax. But let me go one step further, right? Because it's not just the elites versus the non-elites. I think it's more of a conversation versus the rulers and the ruled upon, the taxpayers and the tax consumers, right? Because look, if you start a business and you're just in the free market, you don't take government subsidies, you don't use government regulations to your advantage, well, how do you make a profit? You do that by selling people things they want to buy and are willing to pay you for. In effect, you are progressing society. And I don't mean in the progressive way. I just mean you're making life better. But now think of the elite class that rely on corporate subsidies, that have lobbyists that lobby the government for certain regulations, right, to keep out competitors. So I do think there's an even subtle difference there. It's not just elites versus non-elites. I like to think about it as the tax-paying class versus the tax-consuming class.
And you brought out a good point too. And this goes into something I tweeted about yesterday. the best way to kind of evaluate how Canada is doing is to compare to other countries. I did a tweet last night. I was just in Arizona and I was shocked at the amount of businesses everywhere. Small business, medium-sized business. In Canada, we have a lot of big box stores, but we don't have a lot of small businesses. How does Canada compare to the US when it comes to stifling innovation, stifling growth, stifling, I guess, businesses compared to the US? And there was also a graph that Marty up north shared recently of the new jobs that were being created in Canada versus the private sector jobs, which would be businesses. How do we compare, and what can we do to kind of make it more competitive in Canada?
Okay, so I don't have the
That's a lot of
overall
questions.
comparison. Yeah, I don't have no, that's cool. I don't have the overall comparison, and I'm sorry, I keep looking down because my mic keeps going quieter on me, but it's probably because I'm so loud. My mic just knows to turn me down a little bit. So I don't have the overall comparison. I know I've seen in the news repeated quite often that our GDP per capita, which is like a wonky way to say our
Yeah.
standard of living, continues to fall behind the US, right? It's actually quite bad for Canadians. Now, in terms of tax competitiveness, because that's really what I focus on, look, Canada ranks awful in terms of tax competitiveness. So we're ranked like 31st out of 38 OECD countries when it comes to individual tax competitiveness. We're ranked 26th out of the 38 OECD countries when it comes to business
Wow.
tax competitiveness. So I mean, we're falling behind. There's no question about it. Now, what can the government do? Honestly, do less. Like it's that
Mhm.
simple, because you have government regulations strangling the economy. Let's see, the unconstitutional No More Pipelines law, which the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we're in the Supreme Court, successfully fought it. The discriminatory tanker ban on the West Coast. Remember that?
Mhm.
Remember that?
Mhm.
Yeah, I remember that. You have the carbon tax, the second carbon tax, the government buried in fuel regulations, the hidden so-called industrial carbon tax, which is just another carbon tax by another name. You have the government reject the Northern Gateway pipeline. You have the government move the regulatory goalposts on the Energy East pipeline, right? It goes on and on and on and on and on. Since 2015, there's been about $670 billion installed or canceled natural resource projects in Canada. Like
That's
all of that
insane.
flows, it is insane. So you ask me, what can the government do? Do less. Just let people build a better Canada rather than trying to intervene on anything, or I should say intervene on everything. Like, look, think about it this way, folks. These busybody bureaucrats, like if they actually knew where the market was going, they wouldn't be bureaucrats. They would
Mhm.
be they would be risking their own money in the market. Okay? These bureaucrats, they try to run around, play investment banker with other people's money, but they couldn't even balance the budget of a lemonade stand.
No, it's true. It's true. They're incompetent. And that goes into another subject that I talked about on my show yesterday. How do we get competent people running our country? And some people think maybe they'll just apply for it. And look, I wasn't talking about the federal because I think they're too overpaid, but I was talking about the provincial, how a lot of the people who would run for government have to take a massive pay cut. Because if we want the qualified people, we want the managers, the people who have started and run businesses, successful businesses. But we don't get that because not only is it not financially beneficial, it's actually a sacrifice when you come to the provincial side. But there's also the whole idea of being an elected official. You get insulted, your family gets targeted. There's a lot of negative. But I'm going to counter that at the federal level, though. They are paid very highly. And you have it here. I'm going to share the screen with our listeners. You did a tweet here and saying MPs take another pay raise, 7,900 to 15,800 on April 1st. There are annual salaries after the raises. A backbench MP makes 211,000, minister 311,000. I didn't know that. And prime minister 422,000. In comparison, I think Donald Trump makes like $200,000, or I don't think it's anywhere near 400,000, and he manages a way bigger country than we do in Canada. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, it pisses me off. No, it does.
Yeah.
Okay, I got a couple thoughts. I mean, like, those numbers are on the screen, so I don't have to repeat them. But so a backbench member of parliament, not a minister, not a prime minister, not a leader of an opposition party, a backbench, along with collecting dust in the House of Commons, they're collecting a salary that's 3 times more than what the average Canadian worker makes in a year. Okay? A minister, 4 times more. Now, why should a minister be getting a pay raise when the deficit last year was like $62 billion? Like, for what? Why are you getting a raise? Right? The prime minister, their salary, whoever it ends up being, will be nearly 6 times more than what the average Canadian worker makes in a year. Let me just point this out too. It's called the House of Commons for a reason.
It's supposed to be common people.
They're supposed to represent the common person. And this is the problem. So let me not, I don't want to play devil's advocate. Maybe this is just a conversation worth having.
Please do. I'm open-minded to my opinions, so please do.
So in the system of democracy, we want people to be financially attached to the people they're trying to serve. Now, what has gone on in Ottawa is the exact opposite, right? They have become so financially divorced from the realities facing their constituents. And that, in part, explains some of the crazy policies that are coming out of this government, right? Because think about it. When they impose these extra taxes, these extra regulation, this inflation through money printing, that raises the cost and makes everything unaffordable. And yes, they kind of pay the taxes, right? Like, at least in theory, they pay the carbon tax too. They pay payroll taxes too. But when they're giving themselves multi-$1,000 raises every year, when they already have these huge salaries, they don't really feel the pain of what they're putting on other people. Okay? So that's number one. Number two, I kind of will go back to what I said earlier. We don't need these technocratic rulers ruling over Canadians. I would even argue that we don't really need better government. We need less government. Right? Like, we don't need these people saying, oh, this is the best way to fine-tune an economy. That's the problem that we have. That's what we have right now. These people, these technocrats who are saying, well, let's just tinker with the economy this way, that way, this way, that way. These central planners. We don't need that. So I would argue that we don't need better government per se. Like, everyone, what is better government? You ask a liberal, you ask an NDP, you ask a conservative, you ask a libertarian, it's something different. What I would argue is that we need less of it.
And you know what? I think you just changed my mind on this. Like, I'll be honest. When you look at, let's compare it to the States. I think it's Montana. They have, or it might be Idaho, where the government only meets like a short period of time out of the year, and that's it. And they don't have a lot of government. They don't have a lot of red tape. I think it's Montana. If we didn't have the government encroaching on all our freedom, making life more difficult, we wouldn't be saying we want a better government. We're saying that because we've seen the incompetence and the complete encroachment on every single day, everything we do, everything that kind of just how we live. So I'm like, I don't want another Trudeau who's incompetent. I would rather hire someone who has maybe an economics background, maybe an accountant who knows how to balance the books. But what you're saying is, if we had a lot smaller government, we wouldn't necessarily need a competent one, because there would be less government and less encroachment, and we wouldn't be so disappointed with the way our world is going.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I'll be very quick on this, but you know who's running on economic competence? Mark Carney. That's what he's running on. That's going to be his campaign, right? Deal with Trump, economic competence. Now, I'm not saying yes or no to any of that. I'm just telling you that's exactly what he's going to run on.
That's what he is
running on, right? So just think about it. And I do think, I'll go back, I don't think we need better government. I think we need less. And I think when people are fed up with the government that we have, and when they think of better government, I think what they're actually, I think what they're saying is they need less government, right? Less regulations, less taxes, less intervention in the economy, less corporate welfare, less crazy spending all throughout Canada and around the world. But it's all less.
And you've changed my mind on that. I think that's what I want. And you're right. That's what Carney's going to run on. But we if you look at his past and his history, we know Carney's just a Trudeau 2.0. It actually, I think he might be worse because he is smarter than Trudeau, but his agenda and his ideas are just as insane as Trudeau, if not worse. And he's so disconnected from the regular everyday people. I don't know if you saw, there was a post going around where he's like in this hockey net and playing hockey. And someone points out how his pair of sneakers or shoes are $2,000. $2,000. But do you think what's your prediction if Mark Carney gets in on which direction Canada's going to go?
Yeah, I honestly, I don't know. I really don't. Like, look, one thing that I'm really worried about from watching some of Carney's press conferences is that you got to check the fine print. Like, that's kind of what I'm getting from some of this. Now, you might remember all the media was saying like, oh, Carney said he would repeal the consumer carbon tax, right? We probably all saw that in the news. But again, check the fine print, right? Because Carney isn't scrapping the carbon tax. He essentially wants to relabel it, hide it in a business carbon tax.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? A carbon tax on business is a tax on Canadian consumers, right? You carbon tax a refinery, you make gasoline more expensive. You carbon tax utilities, you make home heating more expensive. You carbon tax fertilizer plants, well, that increases costs for farmers and you make food more expensive. So like, that's what I would say is watch out, because even though Carney says he'll get rid of the consumer carbon tax, his plan is essentially just a carbon tax on businesses, and a carbon tax on businesses is a carbon tax on Canadians.
It'll increase the price of everything, but it's even worse than that. And I don't think people recognize if a business to work in Canada, to function in Canada, are taxed way more than anywhere else, it will drive that business into countries where it is not. And especially in the competition with the tariffs and all the things with the US, I think if he was to introduce something like that, I think you would see massive amounts of business, manufacturers, any type of production, any type of consumer move to the US. We're already seeing that. We're in this mess in Canada with the whole tariff thing because we don't produce a lot of things in Canada. And that's just a fact. And I think taxing business is a big reason for that. Do you think that the Conservative Party or whichever party's trying to kind of run against Carney, if he's the one that's chosen as the leader, do you think they're going to be able to reach Canadians in time to let them know the fine print and how damaging this is going to be to our economy?
I don't know. Honestly, like I'll tell you what I'm going to do at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation.
Yeah.
We're going to do the best we can to let people know what are the options on the table, right? So we've already written, like, I don't know, since Carney's announcement, probably 5 or 6 national op-eds in national newspapers on the carbon tax. So like, that's what we're going to let people know. I mean, our goal, specifically when it comes to the carbon tax, is completely scrap every single type of carbon tax in Canada. And so look, a business carbon tax or a carbon tax tariff, that's a carbon tax. That's going to make people's lives more expensive who can't afford it, right? So I can tell you what the Canadian Taxpayers Federation is going to do and what we're already doing. We're going to let as many people know exactly what Mr. Carney is running on, and that is a carbon tax.
That's good. That's good. We need more organizations, not necessarily more organizations like you, but we need to be able to reach the general public, because you won't see this being talked about in the mainstream media for the most part. You do have a little bit, but for the most part, it's very much a one-sided narrative. Carbon tax is good. If you don't do anything about it, climate change is going to kill everyone. That's kind of the narrative that they're pushing. How can we, like, I run a conservative organization in Saskatchewan. How can we spread this message more? Or I guess, how can people follow you to get ideas on how to spread the message? Like, where can they find you?
Yeah, there's a couple places. So check out our website, taxpayer.com. The newsroom there, we're breaking so many great waste stories. I think we have the best investigative journalists in the entire country who is just just digging through government records, finding government waste, how they're wasting your money. So he's awesome. Check out the newsroom. We also have a bunch of petitions. And what is awesome about these petitions, like if you care about an issue like the carbon tax, like MP pay raises, well, you can sign one of those petitions. And when we organize action, right, you'll get an email letting you know about the issue you care about when we're actually organizing this action. So sign some of the petitions. I find them very useful in advocacy. And then how to follow us? Well, on all social media, you can either type in the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, like YouTube, like Facebook, like Twitter. If you want to follow me, I'm also on social media. Just I think on Twitter, my handle is @Franco_nomics. I mean, at least I think I'm a good follow. I amuse myself, and that's all that really matters sometimes, right? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Thanks for letting me know. I was trying to find it here. I'm going to share it on the screen. So this is the website, Taxpayers Federation. Sorry, it took me a little bit. For some reason, it wouldn't come up, so I had to Google it. And then to follow you on Twitter, here's his account, Franco_nomics. Not dot, just that's it. If you search that, you'll be able to find you. Okay, so other than the MPP, what are other breaking stories that have kind of happened recently that you think would be good to share? We still have about 15 more minutes.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the capital gains tax. I don't know if you guys have talked about that, but so the Canadian Taxpayers Federation took the Canada Revenue Agency to court, right?
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah. So we took the CRA to court, to federal court, because they were going to enforce an undemocratic and illegal tax hike, right? So look, we've all heard of the saying, no taxation without representation. Now, it's an important principle. It's a catchy slogan, but it's more than that. No taxation without representation is actually enshrined in Canada's constitution. So essentially what that means is that it's Parliament's job to approve tax increases. But on the capital gains tax hike, the government failed to introduce the legislation, debate the legislation, pass the legislation, or proclaim the legislation into law. And yet, these unelected bureaucrats at the CRA were still going to go ahead and take billions of dollars from Canadians this year with the illegal and undemocratic tax hike. So we launched the legal challenge on a Friday, and it was exactly 1 week later after we launched the legal challenge that the federal government said they weren't going to enforce the capital gains tax hike this year. They're going to delay it to next year. So this was a huge victory for Canadians who stepped up, who helped with the legal challenge. It was a huge victory because they're not enforcing it this year. But the fight is still on because the government still plans to enforce the capital gains tax hike next year.
Yeah. So depending on who forms government, I think Pierre talk about this if he was going to scrap it? I think he was going to scrap it, right? If he gets elected in the next election. But I can't remember if any of the other people running for the Liberal Party mentioned anything. But there was another guy that was talking about this a lot. I think it's Dan Kelly.
Yeah,
he's in charge,
like the small business guy.
Yeah. So, and the businesses were asking, okay, how can you tax us on something that hasn't passed? And just for the listeners, basically, it was mentioned in the budget that they were going to do this, or mentioned in legislation, but it never went through the whole voting, yay, nay, from the elected officials. And because the parliament's closed, there was no doing, or they prorogued parliament, there was no putting that through. But CRA was still going to collect it, even when it hadn't been voted through, which I find, like, if that's not the definition of theft, I don't know what would be. But I have a love-hate, actually a hate-hate relationship with CRA. And I think a lot of Canadians do too. But what are other things that have happened in the last year that you guys have fought? Like you fought this in the court system. How do you guys pay for all of that? Like, do you guys do fundraising? Should we send
Yeah.
people, the
Yeah.
listeners, to help
Please, like
support?
if you want to all of our donations are just are voluntary donations from Canadians.
Mhm.
So we don't take any dollars. We don't take any money from government. Never have, never will. We don't take money from political parties, and we don't take money from anywhere outside of like from people who are not Canadians, right? So we only take
Okay.
money voluntarily from Canadians. So all of this is fundraised, right? If you like what we do,
Yeah.
and you do have the means, please go to taxpayer.com where you can donate. I understand times are tough, but that's how we keep the lights on, so to speak,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
Okay, so oh, sorry, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. No, no, go ahead. I was just going to say, I'm glad you guys stepped up to do that, because if not, like, this would have been millions and millions of dollars from Canadian that would have been collected that shouldn't be collected. So
Yeah,
thank you
billions.
so much for stepping up and doing that. But go ahead with the other
Well,
subject.
do you want to know the biggest single issue I think facing taxpayers as it's the bureaucracy. It's the federal
Mm.
bureaucracy. Since Trudeau has come to power in less than a decade, the cost of the federal bureaucracy has gone up 73% in less than a decade. The
Can
cost
you
of the bureaucracy.
can you compare like numbers of how many government employees we had before to now? Do you have those numbers to
Yeah,
give
we
even?
have 108,000 extra bureaucrats. 108,000. So if the size of the government over Trudeau's tenure had just increased with population growth, we would have 72,000 fewer government bureaucrats. Okay?
Wow.
And look, like not only that, but they take taxpayer funded bonuses every year
Mhm.
despite failing. Most years the departments don't even meet half of their own performance targets. Yet 90% of government executives take a bonus. Let me give you some examples of these egregious bonuses. Okay, so you'll all remember the Arrive scam, right? How it
Yes.
went from like an $80,000 app to like $60 million. Well, the government executives working on Arrive they took $340,000 in bonuses.
What?
Like what?
It's insane.
It's insane. Everyone has probably heard about the bonuses at the CBC. So the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we were the first ones to report on all this, right? This was
Mhm.
all our great investigative journalists who dug up these documents and showed that CBC has taken more than like $10 million in bonuses every year. Okay, but it's not just the CBC. The Bank of Canada, they have one job: keep inflation low and around 2%. Well, they've been taking millions and millions of dollars in bonuses, even though inflation reached a 40-year high. Or the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. They have repeatedly said this is a crown corporation, the housing agency of the federal government, and they've repeatedly said that they have one overarching objective, which is housing affordability for all. Well, people can't afford a
They
home.
failed.
Yeah, they failed. And since 2020, they've taken more than $100 million in bonuses. So, like,
Who
it's the
who approves
bureaucracy.
these? Who approves these bonuses? Like, who makes a decision, "Yeah, you should be getting that," or is that people just giving themselves bonuses?
Well, I mean, a lot of the times it's happening through the Crown Corporation, right? But I mean, at the federal government, you would have to imagine it's like the upper echelon of the bureaucrats. But at the end of the day, like the bureaucrats aren't the ones who are supposed to be determining the money.
No.
That should be our
No.
politicians. So
Yeah.
the people who are really to blame here are the prime minister, cabinet ministers, and the finance minister, right? That's who has the ability to
Mhm.
stop this. Now, let me tell you something. So when Poilievre was running for Conservative Party leader, he came on the Canadian Taxpayers podcast, and he committed to ending the bonuses for failing government authorities. So that's something that we got to hold him accountable to if he becomes
Mhm.
prime minister.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Not only that, I think they should lower the amount of government officials. And I say this as a former bureaucrat. Like, I don't know if you know, but before before this, I was a police officer, but before that, I actually worked for Service Canada for 5 years. So I would have been one of those bureaucrats, mind you, not at the higher level, not directly within the government, but still a government employee. And the amount of waste that I saw, even being an employee, and just the mentality of a lot of the workers is you just have to do the bare minimum. Like, it's not like in the private sector where there is competition. There is, like, once you're in the federal government, you're kind of in there forever. And I'm not saying I work that way, but it's just like this mentality that I witnessed. And not just that, the government, the waste, even in the RCMP, when March 31st would come, like just before, a few weeks before, they'd be like, oh, we're about $100,000 below our budget. They won't give us the same amount next year unless we use it all. So what do
March
you guys
Madness.
want? What do you
March
guys
Madness.
want? And it's true. And then they would order insane stuff just to make sure we use everything instead of just letting it go and using what you need next year. I found that so sickening, but it
Yeah,
happened.
it does. And
Yeah.
Nadine, unfortunately, this March Madness is what, we call it. It's happening still. And I'll just tease up people to give you some extra reason to follow the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Is tomorrow, February the 13th, Thursday. We're going to be releasing a bunch of access to information records on Global Affairs Canada and on their March Madness spending spree. And you guys are going to lose your minds when you see what kind of things they blew our money on in March Madness.
That's insane. So just for people who don't know, who aren't really involved in government, they wouldn't have known that. But anyone who's kind of worked with the federal government, so the year end is March 31st. April 1st, you start in the new year. So that's when it always happened. But thank you so much for releasing that information. Now, the question is, we can all know about it, but who's holding the elected officials accountable? That's my question.
Excuse me.
It's okay. I keep coughing. If people wondering what I have in my mouth, I had a halls in my mouth because I didn't want to be coughing the whole episode. I'm not even sick. I don't know where the cough's from. So, but yeah, like it used to be like generations ago, media would be the one, like mainstream media that's on everyone's television would be the one to kind of start releasing that, hold the government accountable. But for years that hasn't happened because they've been bought off. And I'm going to say that it's an opinion, but it's also a fact. They've been given millions and millions of dollars to perpetuate what the current government is doing. How do we change that part of it?
Well,
Other than
number
pull that
one,
money?
yeah, number one, you pull the money. See you later. Right? And the media bailouts, hundreds of millions of dollars, and defund the CBC, more than $1 billion every single year. So that's number one. Now, number two, like what can average people do? Well, like democracy is a participation sport. You have to stay engaged. Now, whether that's sharing stuff on social media, I think that's the easiest way that anyone can stay engaged, right? You see something, share it. You can, get involved with different advocacy groups, like the Canadian Taxpayers Federation is one. There's a number of other groups out there, right? So that's number two. Number three, as an individual citizen, like hammer your MP. Give them a call, send them emails. They absolutely do feel the pressure of that because the one thing they want more than anything is to keep their cushy political job, right? So put the pressure on them, let them know. But let me just also kind of give a big picture, maybe some optimism. I know we're kind of running out of time here, but like, okay, so without going into the pros and cons of other governments around the world, because that's not my role, right? But if you look at what's going on with Doge in the US, or you look at what Javier Milei is doing in Argentina with the big time wasteful spending cuts, what it is proving is that where there is a will, there is a way, right? When politicians actually want to do the right thing and cut all of this waste and frivolousness, they can't. Right? The other side tries to make it all technical and all hard and, oh, you can't really do that. But what these other countries are doing, at least on the cutting spending side, is proving that it can happen, right? And not only have we seen success in other countries, but we've also seen success right here in our own backyard, let's go back to the 90s, right? Where you had the Liberals in Ottawa, right? The federal Liberals in the 90s. You had what?
Mhm.
The PCs in Ontario. You had the Conservatives in Alberta under Premier Ralph Klein. And I believe it was the NDP in Saskatchewan back in the day that made a bunch of spending cuts, right? Am I
I
misremembering?
think, yeah, I think that with the hospitals and stuff, I think I remember that, but
But
I'm not 100% sure.
the point is, right, you have these different governments within Canada, different political stripes, different levels of government that have proved that when there is a political will to cut spending, to reduce the tax burden, to reduce the debt burden, it can happen.
Mhm. And Mealy, whatever how you say his name, is a perfect example. You had a country that the inflation was like insane. People were starving. They weren't surviving. And he, even just in a short period of time, how much it's changed that country. There's another one too in Argentina that did similar things as well. And now I think it's Argentina, and now that country is thriving. So, and you're seeing that in the US. I'm looking forward to seeing what the numbers are going to turn out in the next year. And because it's happening before us in the US, I think it's going to create a lot of momentum and encourage voters and taxpayers to start thinking about different ways our country is going. Because what we're doing right now is not working. Everyone's struggling. So, do you have any other final words for the listeners?
I
Maybe.
just want to say thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate you having me on, and I really appreciate all your listeners out there for staying engaged. And yeah, just want to say thank you.
Thank you for coming on, and not just that, thank you for changing my mind on something. Because look, I have an open mind. I used to be on the left. I used to be a lefty. So I have an open mind to being corrected or given a different perspective. And I hadn't really looked at that perspective of just less government. We don't need competent people if the government's not taking charge of so much in our lives. And in Saskatchewan, we're very different too, because we have so many crown corporation. The government is
Mhm.
involved in almost everything. So and I'm thinking, I want competent people if we're going to have everything run by government. But what you're saying is, no, let's not have everything run by government. And then it'll be run by competent people, because the competent people will rise to the tops within the businesses. They'll get successful. And it's such a good point. So I'm going to change my whole perspective and even message and say, no, I don't want the provincial governments to be more competent or pay more. I want there to be a lot less. And I think
Yes,
that would solve the problem. So thank you so much
here,
for
here.
even changing my perspective during this episode, because I honestly think if you leave people to make their own decisions, that if you leave it to the will of the people and not forcing everything onto the people, I think it turns into a healthier society. There's less, it can become so toxic when it's government run. It's us versus them, and it's so divisive. And even just seeing Trudeau push the whole, we're going to tax the rich, we're going to tax all the businesses or Carney, this business tax. So it's the people against the businesses, right? They're giving them another target to be like rah 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 against, without even recognizing, no, it's the government that's causing their issues. It's the
That's it.
government that's causing
Yeah,
everything to rise. So I think we need to point to the true target and say we want less of that. But
agreed.
thank
I
you
couldn't agree
so
more.
much for, yeah, thank you so much for coming on and for helping correct my perspective on something that it was obviously quite wrong on. All right, thank you, Franco. I'm gonna put you down, and I'll just close the show here for a couple minutes. Thank you
Take
so much for
care.
coming
Thank
on.
you.
Wow. So like I said, I have an open mind. I can be wrong sometimes. I can have perspective that once I'm given new information completely changes. And this show was a perfect example of that, especially and anyone who hasn't watched yesterday's show. So you'll know what I mean if you go watch yesterday's show. I was advocating we should be paying government officials what they're worth for what they're running. And I wasn't talking federal. They get paid way too much, but I was thinking provincial, since they're in charge of our country. I want people who are competent, and competent people don't usually run because it's too much of a financial sacrifice. But what Franco is saying is, no, let's have less government run less things. Let's get the general public, private enterprise to run more things. And I think that's a really interesting perspective. And I think it change. I don't think I know I'm fully changed my mind on that. I want less government. They don't need to be as competent if they don't run everything. And I would rather people get to choose how they run their lives. So, but thank you so much for watching. If you don't follow me already, I highly recommend you do. I do content like this Monday to Friday. It's a live stream show. So if you're watching it on the replay, this is live. There is no editing. There's no editing out sneezes or coughs or anything at all. It's live. What you get is what you get. And but yeah, if you don't follow me, I'm on all social media platform, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Rumble, Instagram. I don't live stream on TikTok and Instagram yet. I was trying to get it going today. That's why it was the first thing on my mind. It's not going too good. But anyways, you can search me by searching Nadine G. Ness. All the platform, it's Nadine G. Ness. And yeah, I will be back tomorrow. Tomorrow I have Vaughn. Oh my gosh, it's not Vaughn's the last name. Frank Vaughn. Am I saying it right? I think I am. I'm just looking quickly here. We were chatting. Yeah, Frank Vaughn coming on the show tomorrow. Let's see. Let's get his profile up so you guys can see it. And then I'll close up the, there you go. So I have Frank Vaughn coming tomorrow on the show. He's been talking a lot about the foreign interference and a lot of things that he's uncovered, and he's been digging into that. So if you don't follow Frank, also he does a show. I don't know if it's live. It might be live. I think it's daily. I think he does it even more than me because I saw he had a show going on the weekend. I just do Monday to Friday. But yeah, so he's coming on tomorrow. And then Friday, I won't have any guests. I'll just be covering what's happening in the news, which is a lot. It's hard to follow. I have a whole bunch of bookmarks saved between yesterday and today of a lot that's happening. But yeah, so if you don't follow me, and I'll be back tomorrow at 12 o'clock with Frank Vaughn. See you guys. Have a good afternoon.